The most significant addition that was made by the Seahawks in free agency, they're going to be counting on Demarcus Lawrence to do big things in Mike Macdonald's defense. But what can a 33-year-old veteran still bring to the table at this stage of his career? Kicking off our offseason film review, we're going to be talking D-Law, how he fits in the Seahawks scheme, coming up next here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12s. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Whether you are listening in Renton, Washington, or in Columbia City, Indiana, where I am recording from my car today, we greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Didn't have a Monday show, extended Father's Day, but we are looking forward to diving into a number of Seahawks-related topics here on today's show. We're going to have our off-season program review, starting with the quarterback position, and we're going to be diving into the first 5 players on our annual 90-man countdown, numbers 90 through 86, 5 undrafted rookies currently on Seattle's roster. Going to be a jam-packed episode brought your way by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Now for your lead story here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This offseason, Seattle mostly used the draft to go after offensive players. Free agency, it was much the same, upgrading those positions or filling positions left behind with Geno Smith, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and company out of town. Had a number of holes to fill on that side of the football. But that doesn't mean they didn't make a significant addition in free agency on the defensive side of the ball, along with re-signing Ernest Jones and Jaron Reed. At Durde, gosh, I cannot talk today. Adam Durde was reunited with Demarcus Lawrence, the former Dallas Cowboys defensive end, signed a 3-year contract to play in Mike Macdonald's defense. They added him to a group with Uchenna Nwosu, Boye Mafe, and Derek Hall. And certainly, if you're looking for pedigree, Rob, Demarcus Lawrence has multiple Pro Bowls to his name. He's been an all-pro player in the past. His sack production's been kind of hit and miss through the course of his career, but he's consistently been a really good run defender, and he's also been a highly respected locker room guy that coaches have a lot of respect for as well. We haven't had a chance, though, to truly pull back the curtain on the film because Demarcus Lawrence turned 33 recently. So he is not a spring chicken. He is getting to be an older player that's a little long in the tooth. And so the time is now for us to really start to peel back that curtain and look at what the Seahawks are getting in 2025 with Demarcus Lawrence. And I'm looking forward to us doing this with a number of new additions in free agency in the draft, where we really take a deep dive into what we see on tape and your scouting expertise, my former coaching expertise, X's and O's. I think the two of us are going to be able to balance this and make this really interesting. But when it comes to Demarcus Lawrence, you've got a very unique perspective here on this show. I've only got to see him practice in OTAs wearing underwear, basically. You've got to see Demarcus Lawrence in a training camp setting with full pads. And you've talked about this a number of times, that he's been one of the most impressive players that you've ever seen on a practice field.
Yeah, you just stole the words right out of my mouth, Corbin. I had the opportunity, of course, last couple of summers to go to the Dallas Cowboys training camp in Oxnard, California, as part of my duties with the BC Lions. And yeah, I was very much expecting to just be wowed by players for the Dallas Cowboys, like a CD Lamb or a Dak Prescott, Ezekiel Elliott, certainly a Micah Parsons. Corbin, for my money, I thought that Demarcus Lawrence was the best player on the football field each of the last 2 training camps. Now, my job, of course, is not to be watching the NFL superstars. It's to be watching the guys that are on the bottom side of the roster that my Lions might be able to sign. But sometimes players are just so damn good that they steal your attention. Demarcus Lawrence being one of those. Anybody who has watched the Dallas Cowboys against the Seahawks over the last couple of years have also seen big number 90, make an awful lot of big plays against the Seahawks. So, yeah, Corbin, as you said, we're excited to kind of break down these players. I mean, obviously, we're going to be talking about Sam Darnold. We're going to be talking about Cooper Kupp, some players that maybe because we live in a fantasy football crazed world now, that maybe they have a little bit more name recognition to them. But as you alluded, Demarcus Lawrence is a 4-time Pro Bowler, 1-time All-Pro. He was a Pro Bowler each of the past 2 seasons up until last year, where he actually had 3 sacks in 4 games, was very much on his way to becoming a Pro Bowler again before he suffered the Liz Frank injury. And so the fact that he is, as you said, 33 years old, I understand there's going to be some skepticism out there from Seahawks fans, but Corbin, I'm really excited to talk about Demarcus Lawrence. I think that his versatility, his physicality, just the effort with which he plays and practices, I think that he is going to be a perfect fit in Mike Macdonald's defense. And one of the biggest reasons, frankly, of why the Seahawks may not be going after a player like Jadeveon Clowney, because they feel like in Demarcus Lawrence, they've got a better version of Clowney already on the roster.
And I think the reason that might be, that may be the case that ultimately Lawrence makes it they don't go after Clowney's, because they are 2 of what I think in today's NFL are pretty rare breeds. They are outside linebackers and defensive end hybrids that have the size to be able to put their hand in the dirt and also play as 2-point stance. You can slide them inside to sugar the A gap, but they are excellent run defenders. They set the edge. They use their length. They play with physicality, and they're able to stack and shed. And what I mean by that is they're able to stack up their blocks, and then they can shed them to make plays either direction, get into the backfield. Both of these players, Clowney and Lawrence, can do that. And when you turn on the tape, and listen, I've watched Demarcus Lawrence dating back to his time at Boise State. I've been a huge fan of him since he was playing in college ball. And I could go back and watch film from 5 or 6 years ago, but that to me is not going to give you the best indication of what you are going to get now. Looking at the 3.5 or so games that he played in last year for Dallas, as you mentioned, he had 3 sacks in those games. He also had 7 pressures. He was consistently getting after the quarterback. Sacks have been hit and miss in his career. Pressures have not been generally. He's been pretty good at getting pressure on QBs, even if it doesn't always turn into sacks. And the thing that I still see in his game, I still see more than enough burst. He is not quite as twitchy as he was when he was 25, 26. That's to be expected. But he still had plenty of juice rushing upfield, a good rip-to-dip move to get around the corner, and he was really good at bull rushing, which is something Leonard Williams talked about with us last week at minicamp. That's something that doesn't age very quickly. Like, you have power, you can win with power in the NFL for a long time. Calais Campbell is like 70 at this point, and he's still winning with power. So my point is Demarcus Lawrence has that ability, the stack and shed as a run defender, and you can move him all over the line. Even though he is not built to play a ton of snaps as a 3-tech or a 4-eye that's shading the inside shoulder of the opposing tackle, Dallas did it some last year with him, and he was effective on third downs, obvious pass rushing situations. His quickness and his craftiness makes it really tricky for guards, and he can get in the backfield. Cleveland they had no answer for him when they reduced him inside in that game. What you're not going to get as much of at this point, I don't see quite as much consistency from him in terms of being able to handle down blocks, handling doubles, and he's not quite as effective when he's out in a 2-point stance when it comes to just truly getting upfield. He has done better later in his career with his hand in the dirt, and Mike Macdonald's going to ask his outside linebackers to do a lot of the 2-point stance stuff. So I'm wondering just how much juice is left from that perspective. But the fact that you can move him all over the place between 3-tech out to wide 9, and he can be effective rushing the passer with power and finesse in all those regards, I think that's something that obviously needs to be considered here. And those watching, sorry, I'm in a car and my lights just turned off because it's trying to conserve power. So right now I'm in the dark. We'll see if we can get this figured out while Rob is talking.
Well, and again, just to kind of make a joke light of Corbin's situation here, I do think that the light will shine bright when you see Demarcus Lawrence on the field for the Seahawks, just because for two of the things that you just kind of alluded to, Corbin, just his brain. Demarcus Lawrence is a very savvy football player. When he is blocked, he isn't blocked for long. That's one of my favorite things about him is he locates the football and then he hustles to the ball, whether it be laterally or downfield. And you don't see a lot of guys at his age, at his size, that are still pursuing downfield with reckless abandon, and yet he does. The other thing that I love about Demarcus Lawrence's game is his hands. Corbin, in the state of Texas, Demarcus Lawrence's hands are registered weapons. I mean, this guy is absolutely dominant when it comes to knocking the football out. And as I talked about before, that's been, to me, one of the concerns I have about the Seahawks. I want to see more tall defensive linemen get their hands in the air. The Seahawks right now, other than Demarcus Lawrence, their highest forced fumble guy is both Jaron Reed and Uchenna Nwosu. They each have 8. Demarcus Lawrence has 21. I mean, it's above and beyond. He's got 20 passes broken up at the line of scrimmage as well. The man just recognizes where the football is and gets his hand in passing lanes. He comes in with these karate chops that are going to make Peanut Tillman and Kobe Bryant for the Seahawks just, jealous in terms of how well that they do it. So again, he's absolutely terrific in that regard. You mentioned the Cleveland Browns game a year ago. I mean, he had 2 sacks in that game as well as a forced fumble. Again, this is a player that at 33 shouldn't be able to take over games, but he does. So as excited as I am about the Seahawks defense and based on what they did a year ago, all Seahawks fans should be very excited. You should be absolutely ecstatic about the addition that is Demarcus Lawrence, assuming he stays healthy. And durability has never been a concern for him up until this past season when he had the Liz Franks injury. And basically they shut him down after just 4 games. So he's had almost a full calendar year to get himself back and ready. And obviously the Seahawks wouldn't have signed him if they had any concerns about his durability. Again, I think that Demarcus Lawrence is going to help the Seahawks become a top 5 defense. I think that he's going to be in the running to be among the best defensive players on this roster next year. And I don't think a lot of people nationally are expecting that.
When we come back, we are going to shift gears to our first post-offseason position overview. And we've got the quarterbacks. We're going to be talking about upside and expectations, who's got the most on the line, and much more. We're going to be diving into that up next here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. There's nothing like the NBA Finals, the intensity, buzzer beaters, fans losing their minds. It's the kind of atmosphere you must experience live, and this year's matchup has already delivered. If you want in, Game Time makes it fast and easy to get seats, even for the biggest playoff games. Prices on the app actually drop closer to tip-off, and with killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees, Game Time is a total game changer. Game Time makes scoring NFL tickets just as easy. You'll find great seats for as low as $100 thanks to exclusive discounts. And with a Game Time guarantee, your tickets are 100% authentic, will arrive on time, and you'll always get the best price with fees included. So what you see is what you pay. If you've never used Game Time to grab NFL seats, now's the time. Take it seriously with a game day upgrade. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. He's Rob Rang. A special thanks to each and every one of the 12s listening in, and thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. The offseason program in the books, wrapping up last week for the Seahawks, so we are now in the midst of a roughly 6-week hiatus here where players are going to be on vacation. They're obviously still working. At least you hope they're still working leading up to training camp in late July. And since we are now in that hiatus mode, it's a great opportunity to revisit all the position groups and look at what we saw and learned in the offseason program expectations, who's got the most on the line, predictions. And we got to start with the most important position in pro sports, Rob, and that's a quarterback spot where Seattle's got 3 brand new signal callers. Look, I know Drew Lock has been a Seahawk before, but this is still an offense that's way different than any that he's ever played in for more than a couple weeks at least. He was with Kubiak for like a hot minute before the Russell Wilson trade, but he has not played this offense with the Giants last year. So you've got a totally new look quarterback position. And I think we got to start this discussion here with the question, who's got the most on the line? And, you know, there may be some position groups where this is debatable, but I think when you're talking about the quarterback position, especially when you just had a guy that made the Pro Bowl 2 of the past 3 years and was a comeback player of the year in 2022, you're replacing him with another quarterback that took a similar path. Of course, Sam Darnold's got to be the natural and only answer here as far as who's got the most on the line.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously with Geno Smith basically being shuttled out of town, and you replace him with Sam Darnold, you reward him with a $3 or $100 million contract when, just a year ago at this time, a lot of people were wondering if Sam Darnold was basically on his way out of the NFL. So the leap of faith that the Seahawks took with Sam Darnold, I think puts an awful lot of pressure on him. All this talk about playoffs in Seattle, again, just going to heap up that much more pressure on Sam Darnold. The fact that there is some familiarity with Clint Kubiak and this offense, again, just heaps on that much more pressure on Sam Darnold. You're bringing back, the state of Washington's favorite son, so to speak, and Cooper Kupp. So again, you have the wide receiver talent. You hopefully, supposedly have a better offensive line play. If the Seahawks don't return to the playoffs this upcoming season, Corbin, a lot of the blame is going to shift, fairly or unfairly, on number 14, Sam Darnold. So I am fascinated to see how Sam Darnold is going to be able to handle this type of pressure. Based on my evaluation of him as a person and as a player, I think he's going to excel. I'm very excited about what he's going to bring to the Seahawks. I think that he does bring a clutch factor going back to his college days. That is something that the Seahawks have missed at times. And I think that you're going to see that play out in terms of the number of wins that he helps the Seahawks generate this year, and then some of his own personal statistics as well.
Whether fair or not, Rob, and maybe somebody like me or our friend Greg Bell that has been talking about what we've seen from Jalen Milroe at the end of the offseason program, maybe guys like us are partially to blame for this too. Although, it's just, you analyze what you see. Sam Darnold is going to have a little extra pressure on him potentially if Jalen Milroe continues his ascent and he plays really well in the preseason, and then you get start of the regular season, if Darnold struggles out of the gate, like the Seahawks are not going to bench him after 2 games. They're not going to do that. However, I can tell you that Lumen Field, the fans are going to make their presence known if Jalen Milroe has a really good preseason and suddenly Sam Darnold comes out and doesn't look like the guy who had a breakout year with the Minnesota Vikings. If he's struggling with turnovers, he's taking too many sacks, and the offense is just generally not improving upon last year's lackluster effort, then you're going to get a lot of clamoring for Jalen Milroe. There may be a handful of people that say Drew Lock, but there's going to be people that want Jalen Milroe. And the reason behind that is because when you're looking at who has the most upside, I still think Sam Darnold's got room to get better after watching last year. There's definitely area in his game. He's 28. It's not like he's been in the league for 50 years and he's reached his pinnacle. There's still room for him to get better. But at the same time, he doesn't run a 4.39 40-yard dash. And Jalen Milroe, you see it at the practices, like the guy just barely flicks his wrist. I kind of see Mike Vick in that standpoint, where when Mike Vick let it cut loose, he didn't look like he had to even rear back and throw the football. Like he just kind of flicked his wrist and it goes 70 yards. Jalen Milroe's got that kind of natural arm talent, and you can see it on his game film. Now, doesn't always show up accuracy-wise, but the reason that I'm bringing that up, yes, Sam Darnold's got a lot of room to grow still, and he's got a lot of weight in his shoulders, but one of the reasons that there may be more weight on his shoulders is because, and I think this is a good problem to have, you now have this really intriguing rookie that's got some traits that Sam Darnold simply does not have, and most QBs in the league don't have. And that always creates that possibility opening door. If Darnold starts off well, then you don't have to worry about it. But if he doesn't, and Milroe had played well in the preseason, I mean, backup quarterbacks become popular anyway, but when you got a guy with those kind of tools that has the upside, the oozing upside that Jalen Milroe does, then it can start to get a little complicated for an organization.
Yeah, I'm happy that you mentioned that because I just gave it a whole bunch of reasons of why I think that Sam Darnold is under extreme pressure and didn't even mention Jalen Milroe, who we 100% agree, Corbin, that he definitely has the most upside of this quarterback group for the Seahawks. I think that Sam Darnold can play very, very well, but if Jalen Milroe shows the sparkling athletic ability and arm talent and charisma, just the his ability to articulate answers. I mean, he looks and sounds like a quarterback in that regard. And so a lot of times when you have quarterbacks who are extremely athletic, then sometimes you listen to them in interviews and they don't sound quite as much like the kind of a guy who can be the leader of men in the huddle, be able to articulate all of those long play calls that are kind of notorious for the West Coast offense that Clint Kubiak is going to be calling. It sounds like that Jalen Milroe is handling that to perfection. And of course, you were there at the OTAs. You saw how impressive he was. So I'm curious to see, even if Sam Darnold plays well in the beginning of the regular season for the Seahawks, if Milroe is as dynamic as I think, and perhaps we think that he is going to be over the preseason, there might still be a whole bunch of Seahawks fans out there clamoring for Jalen Milroe to get onto the football field sooner rather than later for Seattle. Finally, I kind of want to shift the conversation here for a moment, just because, again, we're presuming that Sam Darnold is going to be the starter, and I very much believe that he's going to be successful. So I want to kind of jump in here as far as a bold prediction for Sam Darnold. Then, again, we've been talking about Jalen Milroe and Sam Darnold. I want to go back to Geno Smith for a moment and just kind of go back to the numbers that Geno Smith had a year ago. He threw for 21 touchdowns. He had 15 interceptions. He was sacked 50 times. He led the Seahawks 4 times to game-winning drives to win the football game. I think that Sam Darnold is going to improve on all of those numbers. I think that he is going to have more than 21 touchdowns. I think he's going to have less than 15 interceptions. I think he's going to have less than 50 sacks. And I think he is going to at least match the 4 game-winning drives that Geno Smith had a year ago. And frankly, more importantly, I think that Sam Darnold and the Seattle Seahawks are going to have a hell of a lot more victories than Geno Smith and the Las Vegas Raiders are going to have in 2025. Sorry, Pete Carroll. That's what I see happening.
Yeah, I can't quite get on board with that because of all 4 categories. I mean, Sam Darnold had 5 game-winning drives last year, but that is one of those things that's really hard year to year to maintain those because game situations are also part of that. Now, maybe Sam Darnold gets those opportunities this year in Seattle, but my bold prediction here, and honestly, I don't think it's bold. There's going to be a lot of people that think it is, but I think Jalen Milroe rushes for at least 3 rushing touchdowns this year. I think Seattle, that is where they're going to use him the most. When they get in the red zone, we've talked about this so much. I think the biggest reason Seattle missed the playoffs last year was the red zone inefficiency and lack of balance. And I know everybody's going to point at Geno Smith, and I've done this. I've documented all the interceptions that he threw in the red zone. There was 1, maybe 2 that I blame him for because either you had really bad route distribution, which I think that's one reason that Clint Kubiak is here now instead of Ryan Grubb. And I think the other issue, they could not or did not want to run the football. And really, I should say and in the middle of that, because I don't think they wanted to and they couldn't do it. On top of that, they were one of the worst rushing teams in the red zone. They had decent touchdown numbers, but the yards per carry near the bottom of the league, stuffs, they were near the top of the league. Jalen Milroe can be an equalizer in that regard. If you put him in on 3rd and goal and the defense has to evaluate, or they have to compensate for his running ability as well as Ken Walker III and all the running backs Seattle has, it just creates major conflict for a number of positions on defense. And I think Clint Kubiak, we've seen what he's done last year with Taysom Hill, mixing in some of his receivers, doing stuff with. He is going to use Jalen Milroe in those short yardage and red zone situations. And I think it shows up with at least 3 rushing touchdowns. So that is my bold prediction for this year, that the rookie doesn't start any games, but he still finds the end zone at least 3 times as a runner. And you know what? Let's put a cherry on top. And he also gets a passing touchdown in one of those plays as well. So at least 4 touchdowns this year for Jalen Milroe as a sub-package player. When we come back, we are going to kick off our annual 90-man rundown. We've got numbers 90 through 86, and we're going to be looking at 5 undrafted rookie signees for for the Seahawks to open a list, including one that I think might have just landed in Seattle like 6 seconds ago. So we're going to get to that coming up next here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Welcome back to Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. I know that it might seem like football season is eons away. Oh, man, offseason program's over. We got to wait forever. Look, it's less than 6 weeks till training camp. Seattle's got 90 players. We are already to the nitty gritty. We got to start diving into all 90 of these players. There's a number of them that are listeners, and maybe even you and I mean, we sometimes run into guys that we have not seen play. Maybe they've been FCS guys that get signed as undrafted rookies. Mike Jarrell getting drafted in the 6th round. You know, there are always guys like that. And so it's always fun to go in and start looking at some of these new players. And to kick off our 90-man rundown, we've got 5 undrafted players that were signed by the Seahawks, and one of them is actually an FCS player. We've got a couple guys that are going to be on this list as well that are heralding from big power blue blood programs as well. So you've got a little bit of everything. And Rob, I want to start off our countdown with the player that just signed actually for the Seattle Seahawks this week. And he is coming from the University of Hawaii, and he's a name that I had a little familiarity with because he was with the Seahawks as a tryout player at their rookie minicamp. And that is tackle Luke Felix Fualalo, who was a starter both as a right tackle and left tackle at Hawaii. And I looked, and maybe there's some testing results out there. I could not find relative athletic score. I couldn't find any testing information on Fualalo, but I could go watch some clips, and I had watched Hawaii a little bit because their quarterback was a player that I had a little bit of interest in. And when I turned on the Rainbow Warriors film, you could see the natural athleticism and lateral agility from Fualalo. So this is a guy that I'm not surprised as an undrafted rookie got an opportunity, even though he wasn't an all-conference player, he got an opportunity to try out for the Seahawks, and clearly they liked enough where they saw there he wasn't immediately signed, but they kept him on speed dial, and after having OTAs and minicamp, you know what, we're going to go back and turn the stone back over and see if we've got something here. And anytime you get a guy that's got athleticism and he can play both tackle positions, if you can prove you can do that against NFL competition, even if you're an absolute long shot, those two things can at least give you a best case scenario where you can end up on an NFL practice squad in Seattle or somewhere else.
Yeah, I do agree with you, Corbin, that he is a long shot, but long is the operative word here. He's got 33.5-inch arms on a 6'7", 318-pound frame. He's got massive hands, 10 and 5/8-inch hands. So if you can just teach him to, play with a little bit more physicality, a little bit more power, because he is very light on his feet for a man of that size. Now, this is an Australia native who wound up only starting playing football at the high school level his junior season. Originally went to Utah for a couple of years, then wound up transferring to Hawaii, where, as you said, he became a starter, both primarily at the right tackle position, but also playing on the left side as well. I love his fit in this system. I think that he is sushi raw. He is exactly the type of a practice squad kind of a candidate that you're looking for. But again, because big guys that can move like him are very rare, I do think that he is exactly the type of player that every NFL team, frankly, should be looking for.
Now go into the FCS level, and honestly, I should say FBS because now Missouri State is going to jump to the FBS level, but they were not last year. Jacardia Wright was actually a fairly highly recruited player, and he had multiple offers from Power 4 schools, but it didn't work out for him in his first 2 seasons, and he averaged under 3 yards per carry in limited action, decided to take his talents to the FCS level to get more playing time, and Jacardia Wright is another one that is absolutely a long shot because just the abundance of talent that Seahawks have at the running back position. But I'm going to give you a name in terms of what best case scenario would look like here. Jacardia Wright, he's almost 220 pounds. He's kind of tall and a little bit different build, but you actually see some similarities when you see him standing next to Damian Martinez. They kind of have similar builds. They're a little taller guys that are around 217, 220 that aren't necessarily the most explosive backs. Wright did not run as well as what Martinez did, but you can see the wide gate. You can see the galloping capabilities. And the first thing that jumped to my mind actually watching the practice field was a guy that didn't make Seattle's roster, but actually dressed for a few games a couple years ago, and he had a really good preseason. That was SaRodorick Thompson, who came from Texas Tech. And he was another guy that was kind of a tall, little bigger back that wasn't speedy, but was more of a galloper. I actually see a lot of Jacardia Wright's game being similar to SaRodorick Thompson. And so all it takes is a guy getting banged up or two guys getting banged up. And Wright could very easily be on your practice squad if he has a really good training camp. And maybe he is the new version of SaRodorick Thompson, who unfortunately didn't last more than a year in the NFL, but that's more than most guys do as undrafted rookies. I do see a lot of parallels with those two players.
I do as well. And I think it's a very apt comparison just because I think it's going to be a similar kind of a difficult road for Jacardia Wright to get into the NFL. But at the same time, you watch him on tape, Corbin. I love the fact that you used the word gallop because for a big man, this guy can play pretty fast, faster than the 4.65 second 40-yard dash would tend to or would suggest. He had a 35.5-inch vertical jump. That usually is a little bit more in line with a time in the 4.5s. So there is some explosiveness to him. He is a big back that can put defenders on their backside. He does have a little bit of wiggle to him. He's got some vaulting, leaping ability to him. He had a couple of jumps over defenders who were trying to understandably take out his legs. He looked like freaking Saquon Barkley with the way he skied over them. So I was impressed by just his general athletic ability. Obviously, he is going to be going up against an incredibly stacked depth chart. So he very much is an outsider looking in at this point. But of the five players that we're talking about today, Corbin, Jacardia Wright to me was the guy who kind of splashed the most on tape.
Yeah, I think he's a guy that might be able to, we see this with running backs too. He might be a guy because of how deep this class was too. If he goes out and has a decent preseason, it might not be in Seattle, but there may be another team that gets banged up at running back that looks at him and says, okay, well, let's give him a shot and see what he can do. So this is still a player, even though he's at the bottom of the list, and Seattle might not be the best fit for him because the talent they have might be able to play well enough that he opens eyes for another team. Coming up next here in our countdown at 88, and this is another player that kind of signed late in the process during the middle of OTA. Seattle's done some shuffling with the back of their defensive tackle group. Anthony Campbell coming from Miami. We know how good the Hurricanes were last year. Not good enough to get to the playoff, unfortunately for them, but they had a team that was loaded with NFL talent. They had the number one pick in Cam Ward, a number of other players that got drafted in April. Campbell was not one of them that did, but yet when you turn on Miami's tape, that was one of the guys on defense. Their defense was very up and down, and that's the big reason they didn't get to the college football playoff. But Campbell was a player that gave them some consistency, and he played more like a traditional nose tackle than what his body would indicate. I'm just wondering if that translates to the NFL. Seattle is listing him as a nose tackle, but another player that I like to look for those guys that are 325, 330, 335 or bigger than that. He's a guy that isn't going to be pushing quite that size, and he's a little bit leaner. I have issues with guys like that a lot of times because the leverage aspect that it takes playing nose, but there is film that suggests that Campbell can do that. But does it translate against NFL blockers? Undrafted guys could make some waves in that position group because we've talked about it. They've really got one true nose tackle on their roster right now, and you would like to avoid having to use Byron Murphy that way unless you absolutely had to for very many reps. So that would be the kind of player that, hey, if you play well, you might be able to jump quickly up the depth chart and have a shot to make the football team.
Yeah, I 100% agree that nose guard is a position. I think that somebody could make a leap up. I would be surprised if it's Anthony Campbell at that position. I like his body frame, as you were just kind of alluding to, a little bit more on the outside. He reminds me of another former Miami player that you actually mentioned earlier, and that being Calais Campbell. I mean, this is a very tall guy with extremely long arms, 34.5-inch arms. So almost vines at this point, and still had 23 repetitions, 200 225 pounds. Again, when you have really long arms and still are able to get the bar up 20 plus times, that is grown man strength right there. So he can play that game. He just is so damn tall that it's hard to play the leverage game inside.
Yep.
So I am surprised that Seattle's listing him there. Wasn't a really productive player, but at the same time, had some splash plays on tape. I saw one play where he originally was playing at University of Louisiana Monroe against the University of Texas. And he was running 30, 40 yards downfield in pursuit. Yep. He ran a 5.0 flat in the 40-yard dash. Again, this is a pretty dynamic athlete for a guy who's almost 310 pounds.
Yeah, it's kind of, I don't want to say tweener, but you do have, when you combine what his strengths are with his athleticism and just the up and down play, that screams tweener, and you're just trying to figure out what the right fit is for him against NFL competition. So he's a guy that I'm at least keeping a bookmark on because of the athletic traits, and he has played against really good competition, and there's been spurts where he's looked like he was a draftable player, just not enough of those for him to get drafted. Two more players on our list today. At 87 at the center position, Federico Moranguez, and he's coming from Florida Atlantic, and this is a position that a lot of fans are going to say, well, this could be one where an undrafted guy can maybe make some waves. But I think it is going to be tricky for Moranguez, especially with Christian Haynes now getting some reps at the center position. And Moranguez, I will admit, this was a guy that struggled quite a bit in OTAs and minicamp. And John Benton, you could see his frustration at times because he was getting coached up and then he was doing the same mistakes on drills. And that was something that I noticed. This guy was a top 15 zone blocking center, though, last year in FBS level, according to Pro Football Focus. And he does have some intriguing athletic traits. Doesn't have the highest relative athletic score, but there are some traits that work in this system and have worked for him as a zone blocker. So maybe another guy that can play his way in the practice squad. I think it would take injuries for him to be at all in the mix to get a roster spot in Seattle, but you always could use an extra insurance center to develop on your practice squad.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of the football becoming more of a world game. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm very much rooting for Luke Felix Fualalo. Just because, again, as I mentioned, he's an Australian native. With Federico Moranguez, he's a Puerto Rican native. And I just think it's really cool just to see players from different areas of the world coming to play this game that, of course, we love so much. And I love the fact that you mentioned just how good that Moranguez was in the zone blocking system. I like his initial quickness. I like the fact that he's been a 3-year starter, a 2-time team captain. And I believe that he does have enough size to be able to perhaps slid outside to that guard spot. At the same time, there is no doubt he is making a significant leap up in competition. I'm sure that he was swimming, so to speak, in that first rookie minicamp. I'm excited to see if he is able to take the next step.
And our last guy here coming into 86, another FCS player from Illinois State. It's interesting. The Seahawks have an Illinois undrafted edge rusher, and they have an Illinois State undrafted edge rusher. The one coming from the Redbirds is Jalan Gaines, and another edge that's in that low 240s, mid 240s range, kind of tall, kind of lanky. We've seen guys built like that be able to excel in Mike Macdonald's style defense, but not necessarily with Mike Macdonald. That's what's funny is a lot of guys that do similar stuff, they'll have overhanging backers that are a little smaller. But even when you look at Boye Mafe and Derek Hall, both those guys are still 255, 260 pounds minimum. Mike Macdonald has typically not liked to have guys off the edge that give up that much weight, which is one of the reasons I don't think Darrell Taylor was on this roster at the start of last season. That just has not been the kind of player that he's been intrigued by. And yet a number of the undrafted guys the Seahawks signed, including Jalan Gaines, fit that profile of tall, leaner, truly have that tweener size in this case. And Gaines was very productive, albeit against FCS competition. And what I saw in the rookie minicamp through the minicamp that they had last week, he was a player that I noticed did have the quickness off the ball. The first step was there. The upfield speed is there. That is something that can translate from FCS to the next level. My question, as the case with always a guy built like this, how is he going to hold up against the run? And he's got some tough run tape at Illinois State. There were some times he got pushed around by FCS blockers. Not saying there aren't good ones down there. I mean, Grace Abel, there's some good ones, but still, that level of competition to get physically bullied at times. I'm just wondering if he's got enough in his lower body to be able to hold up at all. And maybe his calling card is just that situational guy that can play some special teams. That would be his pathway to maybe having a shot at a fifth edge rushing role. But I do have concerns with a guy built like this in this defense, just with Macdonald's track record.
Yeah, I do as well. I think that he's going to have to get more physical. He's going to have to get stronger. He's got, again, very, very long arms. That to me was the theme of watching these five players that we talked about here, all these undrafted free agents. So clearly the Seahawks, it's not just Pete Carroll who is targeting defensive players, especially with very long arms. It's many others, including obviously Mike Macdonald and Adam Durde. With Jalan Gaines, 33.5-inch arms, 10.5-inch hands. His 4.45 short shuttle time, Corbin, was just 1/100th of a second slower than the running back that we were talking about before. So again, he's a guy that has some lateral agility to him. He is, again, very sushi raw at this point, but at the same time, I think if you get him into an NFL weight room, maybe give him a year on the practice squad, then maybe you have something with this young man.
As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Tomorrow, we will be back for our Wednesday show. We'll be talking corners in our post-offseason program, positional overview, and we've got numbers 85 through 81 in our 90-man rundown, and I'm excited that I will actually be at a desk in a studio having a somewhat normal show tomorrow. So make sure that you listen in, enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, and go Hawks.